Jasmine, you're on mute.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Jasmine Gore. I am the chair for the Local Government Advisory Committee that supports the Executive Council to the Chesapeake Bay. Thank you for taking time out of your schedules to participate in today's exciting webinar. We have an esteemed panel that's going to be talking to everyone today, and we're enthusiastic about what the change that we can make in regarding infrastructure with some of the federal aid that's coming down from the American Rescue Plan. So we want to make sure everyone is lively and engaged in this process. So when you have a moment, please drop into the chat where you're from, share your municipality, your role, and so we can get an idea of who is joining us today. Be sure to know that you're going to get this information via email. We're going to follow up any questions that you may have that we may not get to today, but we want to make sure we know who all is here and to make sure that we provide you with the best information possible. So for those of you who may not know what LGAC is, again, I mentioned it is the Local Government Advisory Committee. It's made up of local government officials who have been appointed by their respective governor, in the case of the District of Columbia, the mayor, to be the voice of local governments within the Chesapeake Bay program. We represent localities that are along the watershed, and we're here to make sure that we advance some of our goals to make sure that we protect and promote the Chesapeake Bay and all that goes along with it. So we are looking at some of the responses in the chat. We're really excited about everyone that is here. Just a rule for housekeeping, please be sure to put any questions that you may have into the Q&A box. That is located at the bottom of your screen. We will be tracking questions as they come in, and throughout the presentation towards the middle, we will go through all of those Q&As. So if you want to make sure you get your question counted, put it in a Q&A and not the chat. We're going to be engaging and talking with you throughout this process. Now, we're here to talk about the American Rescue Plan. The goals for our slide is to mention that we're here to provide information on the opportunity to fund infrastructure using American Rescue Plan Act resources and offer examples of projects to address long-standing water infrastructure needs. This is critical where we are right now in terms of addressing climate change, climate resiliency, community needs, and environmental justice and other goals. And so we hope that this information will be a benefit to you and your communities. And we also welcome any feedback so that way we can grow our process and learn how we can make this better over time. I definitely want to take the time out to thank the Chesapeake Bay Alliance staff, Jennifer Starr and Ola Davis, for putting on this amazing event and working with our partners from VML, NLC, and VACO. I do want to take a moment to see if our special guest has arrived to provide a welcome to everyone. Right now, as you know, what's going on in Congress, they're having discussions regarding this large major infrastructure project. And so we're hoping to see if the acting director, Environmental Protection Agency Region 3 will be able to join us. If she isn't online right now, we'll wait to see when she joins and we'll pivot back to her to do a welcome. So let me just defer to Ms. Starr to see if she is available. And if not, we're gonna dive right into the content for today.
I don't see her yet. Yeah.
Okay, so without further ado, we're going to make sure we maximize this time with you. We're going to have an overview of the infrastructure and ARP funds. We have with us Adam Pugh, an Associate Legislative Director, Environmental Energy and Land Use for the National Association of Counties, and Carolyn Burnett, Legislative Director, Sustainability with the National League of Cities. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. We're so excited for you both to be here and to answer some questions and share some information for everyone that's on the line. Again, as a reminder, guests, please put your questions in the Q&A. We will be following that and make sure we answer all of your information. So I'll pass it over to our special guests for them to take over and provide you with their introduction. Adam, Carolyn, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. Well, let me just jump in. This is Carolyn Barrett, National League of Cities. And Jasmine or Jennifer or others, just feel free to jump in and shout if we need to pause for the guest speaker today.
Thank you, will do. Actually, I think, did Diana is on.
Diana is on, I think, so Diana, welcome. Sorry for the confusion.
We're excited.
Do you want to, is she able to?
She's on the sign that she has to. Well, you know what, guys, we are in the world of still using Zoom and it will all be okay. We'll just find her. I don't know if she's on the attendee side.
Can you hear me now?
Yay, we can hear you. How are you doing this morning?
I'm good. I was on, but I could not make myself heard. Sorry about that. And
It's
I don't
okay.
know if I can make myself seen. Let me see, because I think that someone else actually has to allow that to happen.
Yes, we'll ask Ms. Davis to go to the attendee side. I think you're under the name Karen, is that correct? C-A-R-I-N?
Oh, maybe I'm under Karen Bisland.
Yes, you're under that name. So we'll just have Ola click that name and bring you over to a panelist. And once you're transferred to a panelist, you should be able to put your camera on.
Okay.
But no worries, while we take care of that, I just want to do a brief introduction of who you are for everyone that's on the line today. As I shared earlier, we're really excited for Diana Escher to be joining us. She is the acting director for the Environmental Protection Agency's Region 3, and that covers Delaware, DC, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. Diana will share a couple of thoughts on the watershed infrastructure investments, and we're looking forward to hearing some of this great information. So I'll pass it over to you, Diana, to go ahead and there you go. You see perfect timing.
It did. That worked out great. And I'm so sorry that you couldn't see me right away, because I certainly don't want to interrupt the Carolyn, you had started speaking. I'm so sorry about that. So Jasmine, thanks and welcome everyone to this morning's webinar. We really appreciate that the Local Government Advisory Committee and the local leadership work group have brought us all together on such an important topic. And as Jasmine said, this is one that everybody really wants to hear more about. So special thanks go out to all our guest speakers today. I had an opportunity earlier this year to express EPA's appreciation for LGAC's work in representing the interests of local officials, and today's webinar is certainly another example of those efforts. You're going to get information this morning on how funding from Congress with the focus and support from the Biden administration may help with your critical water infrastructure needs. The American Rescue Plan Act, also called ARPA, provides a wide range of assistance to help our nation rebound from the impacts of the pandemic. And it's both sweeping in scope and timely in its approach. Components of the plan are expected to provide funding to help local governments take on projects that may have been beyond their financial reach. And we're really fortunate today to have experts from the National Association of Counties and the National League of Cities provide an overview of the ARPA with a specific focus on stormwater and wastewater infrastructure funding. We'll also hear from some of your colleagues on ideas they have been putting the money to good use. So we know that local governments have had challenges in funding stormwater projects that help control flooding and improve the quality of local waters and ultimately the Chesapeake Bay. And the pandemic has put even greater strains on your budgets, and the impacts of climate change has also strained your systems. And all of us just witnessed the recent and catastrophic impacts of Hurricane Ida that have had impacts throughout the watershed at the local level. With resources from the American Rescue Plan Act and other federal funding initiatives, there's no better time than to invest in those infrastructure projects. When you improve your local watershed and address local infrastructure needs, you're really helping to improve and save the Bay as well. Local governments play a central role in plans by our watershed states to meet 2025 Bay restoration goals. And as we've progressed through 2 phases of the state's watershed implementation plans, we are now in phase 3 of this effort. State partners are focused on actions that will implement those plans. And Pennsylvania is also working on their amendment that's expected to be submitted by December 31st of this year. EPA expects that Pennsylvania's amendment will include sufficient actions and commitments needed to address the partnership's nutrient reduction targets. The phase 3 watershed implementation plans include an emphasis on local involvement, and this has become increasingly important. And there's a really good reason for that. We can't get this done without you. And it's not just the water quality improvements. We're focused on other essential outcomes in the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement, like forest buffers and wetlands that are really off pace and in need of attention. And of course, the commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice deserves a lot of attention. And the DEIJ strategy is available for public comment. We really hope you'll take a look at that and review it. It'll be open until the end of this month. We're very interested in how headwaters play into protecting the resiliency of the local level and also improve the environment and sustainability on site, but with positive impacts for the river, streams, and overall watershed. The American Rescue Plan Act, in part, is designed to help local jurisdictions think creatively and strategically about how to target resources in the best way possible, and may also be able to assist you with funding that you need. I encourage you to check out other opportunities as well for federal funding in the Bay watershed and consider the increasing impacts of climate change in your communities. EPA works with states through multiple funding grants, such as the Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund. The funding supports local stormwater, infrastructure, and agriculture projects in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Integrating green infrastructure practices into your projects increase the quality of life for the residents and also address water quality and quantity. So under Administrator Michael Regan, EPA will continue to be a strong and reliable partner in helping communities meet their goals while contributing to the priorities we've set, from becoming more resilient to climate change to promoting diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice in all aspects of the Bay program. So I hope that you can come away from today's webinar with a better understanding of how the American Rescue Plan Act can help your communities, and I look forward to seeing the results. And thank you, Jasmine, for bringing me in. I really appreciate this and a chance to listen to everyone.
Oh, no worries. I'm so excited that you were able to be here on behalf of the EPA. I'm very grateful that you took the time out of your schedule. I can't say enough that I think your words were perfect. They're dead on with our goals for today. And it also shares the change in the administration to have that focus on truly the environment, but then also making sure that us local governments have the tools that we need to meet our goals, but then also our internal expectations that meet the community, but then also some of the other regulations. And so I think that you were timely. And so I think it's a wonderful introduction to pick it back over to Carolyn, Adam. And again, I think we have a great webinar in store. So I don't want to keep us all longer. We have 282 people on the line. And so I mean, if that's not a testament to what today can accomplish, I don't know what is. So Carolyn and Adam, we're handing it over to you. And thank you again, Diana, for your time.
Adam, you just want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Adam Pugh. I'm the Associate Legislative Director for Agriculture and Rural Affairs and Environment, Energy, and Land Use at National Association of Counties, or NACO.
Okay, great. And again, Carolyn Barrett, National League of Cities. I want to acknowledge our State League partners co-hosting today. Your partnership means a lot. And to everyone out there, throughout the presentation, we have a lot of links to different materials and resources, but don't worry, the presentation will be sent out after the webinar and you'll have access to all of those links. So we can go to the next slide. Great, so let's start with an overview of the American Rescue Plan, also known as ARPA, which was signed into law by President Biden on March 11. NLC, NACO, and other associations worked together during an unprecedented time to deliver unprecedented results to our members. Through our efforts, every city, town, village, and county is getting direct aid for COVID-19 relief. ARPA contains $1.9 trillion of programming to stimulate the economy and help the country recover from the public health crisis. Within ARPA, the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, also known as SLFRF, you'll hear me say, was established to provide $350 billion for states, municipalities, counties, tribes, and territories. This includes $130.2 billion for local governments, split evenly between municipalities and counties. And that means that every city, town, and village is entitled to funds from the $65.1 billion pot allocated to municipalities, and similarly for counties. These funds are not grants or loans, they're a direct allocation. However, they include requirements and responsibilities for use and guidelines that you should familiarize yourself with as you develop plans and spend the funds. So what's the timeline for using these funds? Cities are not required to spend their funds, cities or counties, not required to spend their funds right away. They must be obligated by December 31st, 2024 and spent by December 31st, 2026. We just passed the first reporting deadline on August 31st, and the next deadline is October 31st. You can address emergency needs as soon as possible, but you also have the time to formulate a long-term plan with community input and stakeholder engagement for the remaining funds. And this also gives you the time to review the guidance for eligible uses and funding uses that are most important to your community. Next slide.
So Treasury has given us quite a bit of guidance on how best to spend the $350 billion in state and local fiscal recovery funds. As Carolyn pointed out, 130 and change billion for cities and counties. So there are 7 broad categories of use, 66 subcategories of explicitly eligible expenditures. In short, these buckets support the public health response to COVID. Anything that responds to COVID, PPE, expanding workspaces to accommodate for social distancing, new HVAC systems to address COVID, replacing public sector revenue loss. So you can use your ARP funds to provide government services to the extent of the reduction in revenue experienced due to the pandemic. More commonly, that's referred to as revenue loss, and I will touch on that a little bit later. We also provide a calculator towards the end of our presentation for revenue loss. You can use ARP money on water and sewer infrastructure. That's going to be the primary point of today's discussion, so we will kind of elaborate on that more. And then you can also use ARP money to address negative economic impacts. Responding to economic impacts caused by coronavirus. A lot of examples that we hear in this bucket is regarding tourism, loss in sales tax, so those kinds of things. You can use ARP money for premium pay for essential workers. Treasury outlines that any work done by a city or county employee was deemed essential. However, this work must have been done in person the entire time. You can't use premium pay for telework employees. And Treasury does provide a little bit more guidance on that as well. And then the last big tranche of recovery funding that is explicitly eligible is broadband infrastructure. Cities and counties can invest recovery funds in expanding unserved or underserved communities by broadband. Treasury recently released some guidance for counties on middle mile projects and deemed those to be an eligible expense. The thought is the internet service provider or the city picks up that last mile and connects the broadband infrastructure to the home. Next slide.
So great. And again, the emphasis is that Treasury is looking for direct interventions in the COVID emergency and related effects, and they're trying to keep this true to the idea of recovery. So there are certain things that you can't use the SLFRF funds for. And again, this is the premium pay for telework. Any payments into pension funds or rainy day funds, financial reserves, or outstanding debt, it can be used for the routine pension payments, but not for a bailout of such. And it can't be used for federal match requirements if it's explicitly prohibited by another federal program. And it can't be used for tax anticipation notes or TANs, which is the short-term revenue source. Next slide.
So we wanted to provide some key highlights of the guidance as well. As Carolyn pointed out, Congress passed the ARP or ARPA to turn the tide on the pandemic and address economic fallout caused by the coronavirus. One of the more important things to note, which she highlighted as well, is the expenditure date for funds. So you must allocate these funds by December 31st, 2024. And you have until December 31st, 2026 for project completion. So a different way of thinking of this is contracts must be signed by 2024. All work must be done by 2026. There isn't a deadline to certify for recovery funds. And we'll go into detail on how to certify in a few slides. Treasury has framed the interim final rule and the state and local fiscal recovery fund to be extremely flexible and for you to help those disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. On this note, Treasury provides an extreme amount of flexibility in eligible expenditures and ultimately puts the responsibility onto you. As you are making choices on how to best invest these funds, think about how well you can defend yourself and should an audit come from Treasury, and just make sure that all of the money that you are spending is or can be tied back to COVID or the final rule or interim final rule right now. Another key note is you can put this money into an interest-bearing account. As of right now, it's not applicable to the other federal statutes or state statutes for interest-bearing accounts. And there is a major difference between the CARES Act, CRF, and the ARP recovery funds. This is especially true when it comes to city and county payroll support. Next slide. One of the things you may hear from us throughout the presentation and any NACO presentation is that lost revenue and provisions of the guidance are the absolute most flexible. So recovery funds may not be used as a non-federal match, as Carolyn just pointed out, unless specifically authorized. This is kind of all for grant programs, state matching requirements. Be careful in blending the funds, recovery funds with other revenue sources. One of the recommendations that NACO provides is to keep a clean audit trail. If you can use solely recovery funds on a project, that is something we do recommend. You can use this money to rehire staff to pre-pandemic levels. Cities and counties can use recovery funds for routine pension costs of employees. So as Carolyn just pointed out, typically one of the prohibitive expenditures is pensions. However, the key word here, as she highlighted, is routine. So normal paychecks, normal 3 to 5% retirement, all of that. Congress really wanted to prevent the bailout of massive pension systems. And they kind of ran against third rail politics while negotiating the bill. And that is ultimately where Congress drew the line. Cities and counties can use this money for certain critical infrastructure projects, expanded on water, sewer, stormwater throughout this presentation. You can also do limited capital improvement structures. You can expand certain buildings, but again, try to think about justifying a new building unless it's really solely storage for PPE. And again, kind of keeping a clean audit trail. And then, as Carolyn pointed out as well, every county and then cities with populations over 50,000 received a direct allocation from Treasury. Smaller cities and towns and villages work through their state to receive the funding. And then the last thing I'll highlight is you can pool your money together for regional projects. So oftentimes it's easier for cities and counties to work together, counties and states to work together. But counties can work with neighboring counties to amplify their investments on certain projects as well. Next slide. So we did want to provide a couple of walkthrough steps on how to certify for funds if you have not already done this. So U.S. Treasury released certification guidance and opened the portal for cities and counties to request their recovery funds. Most of you, again, have already done this, so thank you. It is a historical investment, and we appreciate your partnership in this as well. As a way to certify, again, make sure that your city or county has the DUNS number, make sure that you have the active SAM registration, and then you will need the entity ID number, name and contact information, the name and title of an authorized representative of the city or county. We often recommend the chief elected official. And then lastly, you'll need the bank information for your city or county as well. Next slide. So once you have all of that information gathered, go to Treasury and then formally request the fiscal recovery funds. It is linked on the slide. So you just go click on the link, click on where the arrow is pointing to, and then fill everything out. Treasury has provided an email address for you to contact them directly, which is COVID relief IT support at treasury.gov. Should you have any difficulties throughout the process. Next slide. And then one of the many frequently asked questions that we get around the certification process is around ID.me. So Treasury has decided to use this platform to certify you are who you say you are. ID.me is a trusted technology partner to multiple government agencies. We believe without any doubt that your information is secure. It provides secure digital identity verification. Again, you are who you say you are. And then as part of the ID.me process, you will need to provide your social security number, driver's license, and a facial recognition or a selfie. Next slide. So how to report funds. All cities and counties have certified recovery funds are required to submit the interim report. The recovery plan performance report must be completed by cities and counties with populations over 250,000. This is the report that is due October 31st, 2021. These are the projects that require reports for expenditures, data, and awards and subawards, demographic information for each project, and other programmatic data. For cities and counties with awards over 5 million, this recovery plan performance report will be due quarterly. For cities and counties with awards under 5 million, these reports are due annually. And then I would highly recommend using Treasury's portal for recipient reporting, which includes the step-by-step guidance for submitting required reports through the portal. US Treasury also released a video walkthrough of the reporting portal. If you click the link once you get these slides, and then they recently released an updated CFDA number for recovery fund tracking.
Okay, great. So now we're going to dig in on what necessary investments in water and sewer means for your community. The interim rule provides flexibility for many projects to improve access to clean drinking water and improves wastewater and stormwater systems. The necessary investments include projects that are required to maintain a level of service that at least meet applicable health-based standards. And the rule aligns with the eligible projects under those allowed under the Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Funds. And we're going to review those categories on the next slides. The approach of aligning eligibility with the EPA state revolving fund programs is meant to support expedited project identification. And at the same time, the interim final rule is intended to preserve flexibility for local governments to determine funding to their own particular needs and priorities. The Treasury Guidance also mentions 3 other areas for water and sewer projects. The first is climate. There's explicit language in the interim final rule on efforts to address climate change and utilizing green infrastructure, measures to conserve and reuse water, reduce the energy consumption of public water treatment facilities, reduce energy required to treat drinking water, etc. And we'll get into this also in more depth. Cybersecurity is another area to protect water or sewer infrastructure, such as developing effective cybersecurity practices and measures at drinking water systems and publicly owned treatment works. And lastly, given the lifelong impacts of lead exposure to children and the widespread nature of lead service lines, Treasury encourages recipients to consider projects to replace lead service lines. Next slide.
All right, so the Clean Water SRFs, SRFs fund a wide range of water infrastructure projects. At the EPA and federal level, those are 11 types of projects eligible to receive the Clean Water SRF assistance. So with this, the construction of publicly owned treatment works, non-point source projects, national estuary program projects, decentralized wastewater treatment systems. And one thing I will recommend before we go through 5 through 11 is if you are asking about certain water projects and if they do fall under the SRFs, I do highly recommend reaching out to your state Department of Environment, Department of Environmental Quality, Protection, whatever your state's title is that manages and operates the SRF, and just ask, hey, I'm thinking about doing this project. Would it be eligible under the traditional routine SRF process? And if they say yes, then you know you can use ARP money on it. If they say no, then I would highly recommend looking at other revenue sources that you have to spend for that project. So that is one of the little cheat sheets, just because state laws do vary for the SRF programs. State requirements vary. So I would highly recommend getting in touch with your state department that manages it. Next slide. So the Clean Water SRF also includes stormwater projects to manage, reduce, treat, or recapture stormwater or subsurface drainage water, water conservation efficiency and reuse projects to reduce the demand for publicly owned treatment works capacity, watershed pilot projects, and energy efficiency to reduce energy consumption at the utility. Next slide. And then the last three buckets of projects typically authorized at the SRF is water reuse projects to reuse or recycle wastewater, stormwater, or subsurface drainage water, security measures at publicly owned treatment works, both physical and IT security fall under this bucket. And then technical assistance to small and medium-sized publicly owned water utilities to plan, develop, and obtain financing for SRF eligible projects and achieving compliance with the Clean Water Act. Next slide. So the other SRF that Treasury and the EPA have is Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, which is geared more towards providing money for drinking water infrastructure projects. The EPA authorizes 6 categories of projects eligible under the Drinking Water SRF. This includes the treatment of water, projects to install upgrade facilities to improve drinking water quality to comply with the Safe Drinking Water Act regulations. Transmission and distribution, the rehabilitation, replacement, or installment of pipes to improve water pressure to safe levels to prevent contamination caused by leaky or broken pipes. As Carolyn pointed out earlier, that lead service lines are an eligible expense, and it would also fall under this SRF as well. Source water protection and replacement projects, storage for installing and upgrading water storage tanks to prevent contamination entering the distribution system, consolidation for interconnecting 2 or more water systems. This is a question that I know we often get is, can you buy or acquire a failing water system within your city or county? And that would fall under this bucket. And then creating a new water system to construct or to serve new homes with contaminated wells, or consolidating existing systems into a new regional water system. So there is a ton of flexibility within these programs. But again, I would highly recommend reaching out to your states for certain projects. Next slide.
Okay, I'll start this one off. We wanted to give a few examples of SRF projects just to get your juices flowing. So the city of Marietta, Florida, used a Clean Water SRF loan to install solar facilities and solar arrays at their wastewater treatment plant. And this will cover nearly all of their energy needs through net metering. And I'm just going to keep going on drinking water too. The city of Pretty Prairie had long-term issues with nitrate contamination in their drinking water. And they chose to construct a new reverse osmosis water treatment plant to address this nitrate contamination with a drinking water SRF funds.
Yeah, and then for Wayne County, Michigan, under the Clean Water SRF, applied for a $36 million loan for upgrades to its combined sewer overflow basin, pump station, and recirculation facility. And then under the Drinking Water SRF, Washington County, Virginia, applied for $420,000 to extend their water mains and provide water to a nearby community that was previously serviced by contaminated private wells and springs. I wanted to include and highlight this project to demonstrate that you don't always need to spend multi-million dollars to make upgrades, that sometimes projects of the $500,000 bucket are great eligible projects as well.
Okay, the interim final rule includes specific examples of projects related to climate and resilience. Treasury encourages recipients to consider green infrastructure investments to improve resilience and the effects of climate change. And this includes for stormwater runoff, water pollution, and flood control projects. Additionally, it talks about green infrastructure investments and projects that address the impacts of climate change or improve resilience, such as rain gardens, measures to conserve and reuse water or reduce energy consumption of public water treatment facilities, are all specifically mentioned in the interim final rule. And finally, in the cases of natural disaster, recipients can use the recovery funds to provide relief, and it gives examples such as interconnecting water systems or rehabilitating existing wells during an extended drought. And I'm going to mention one specific example that NLC has been partnering on, and that's related to stormwater management in green schoolyards. The city's Connecting Children to Nature partnership, which NLC is a stakeholder in, recommends that you can use these opportunities to pursue and expand the benefits of green schoolyards and implementing them as a form of green infrastructure and stormwater management. Next slide. Okay, wanted to do a quick kind of Q&A overview here. So how do I determine if my drinking water, wastewater, or stormwater project is eligible? These two links here to the clean water and drinking water eligibility guides provide details on the types of projects the funds can be used for. I would recommend doing a word search within these documents for any kind of project that you're thinking of. The important thing here is that local governments are the ones that make the determination as to whether the water infrastructure project is eligible. It is not the state, it is not EPA. The eligibility must align with the SRF project categories, but it's not the state's project categories or definitions, which we know they can differ from state to state. Question 2, do I need an SRF loan in order to use these funds for my water infrastructure project? No, you do not. You do not need to have a current application or loan for water infrastructure project, nor does the project have to be on an existing SRF intended use plan or project priority list. The reference to the SRF programs is simply to determine project eligibility. But as we've said before, it's important to note that these funds can't be used for expenses related to financing, such as paying interest, principal, servicing or redeeming notes, or paying fees or issuance costs associated with the issuance of new debt. The funds can also not be used for paying off fines or other settlement costs, including those associated with a consent decree. Generally speaking, there's no problem using the ARPA funds to pay for a portion of a project and issuing a bond to pay for the rest, as long as the ARPA money is not used to pay down the bond and is instead used for the actual project costs. So it would not be okay to issue a bond for the entire project and then use ARPA funds to pay a portion of the debt. Question 3, can a local government transfer funds to a water utility or water district? Yes. Local governments can transfer the funds to other entities, including other levels or units of government or private entities. And this includes special purpose districts that perform specific functions within the community, such as water, sewer, or fire mosquito abatement districts. So what can a water utility do with the funds? Well, it depends on under which provision the money is transferred. If it's transferred under the infrastructure provision, the utilities can use the funds to cover water, sewer, stormwater projects, as long as they align with the categories of the clean water or drinking water eligibilities. If it's transferred to a utility under a revenue loss provision, there's more flexibility. And for example, utilities could use that to cover unpaid bills. Alternatively, as a local government, you could use the funds under the COVID/negative economic impacts provision, and the local government could provide direct assistance to households for utility assistance, among other things. But it is important to note that the infrastructure dollars can't be used on the revenue loss for the homeowner utility assistance projects. The infrastructure dollars can only be used for actual projects related to water. Number 4, can the funds be used for other types of water infrastructure projects or projects related to cybersecurity or climate change that are not water and sewer? And again, you have to look at the provision and the eligible use. So under the infrastructure provision, only cybersecurity or climate change projects that connected to water, sewer, stormwater are allowed, meaning the funds in this category can't be used for other types of cybersecurity projects or other climate change projects unrelated to water, sewer, or stormwater. But under the revenue loss provision, there gives recipients broad latitude to use the funds for the provision of government services to the extent of the reduction in revenue loss. And again, this can include a whole host of things related to other types of infrastructure, roads, other types of cybersecurity projects, including hardware and software, health services, environmental remediation, school or educational services, provision of fire, police, other public safety. And this is, again, where you'd be able to fund other types of infrastructure projects. And I know I saw at least one question in the chat about NEPA or other federal statutes and whether this applies. So the answer is, are you using the federal dollars for your project, other federal dollars for your project, and what is the nature of your project or program? So ARPA is a blanket distribution of funds. It's not a grant or a loan, and there are no additional considerations that apply to the use of the funds. However, there are a number of federal programs like NEPA and Davis-Bacon that get triggered by taking federal grants or other federal funds. And so the laws are project and program specific. It would not apply in the absence of this other federal funding or other federal support. So ARPA by itself doesn't trigger these laws, but the nature of your project or program or other funding streams might. I just wanted to pause and see, Adam, if you had anything you wanted to add on this slide.
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn. One of the questions that NACO frequently receives from counties, especially for the infrastructure and revenue loss discussion, is regarding road maintenance and sealing of roads or filling in potholes. I think the easy answer, as you pointed out, is it directly eligible? And if you can connect it back to COVID, you have an easier chance of defending yourself to use that money. If not, definitely lean on the revenue loss provisions, and which gives you broad flexibility on using this money. And then also for the next question, for NEPA and federal statutes, we have received a lot of questions today about Davis-Bacon and other prevailing wage requirements. And as you said, as long as you are using solely ARPA funds, you are fine. But as soon as you bring in other federal funds for this project, all of the laws that are triggered under that secondary pot of money are now applicable for the whole project. So do just want to emphasize that key point, that, again, you can use ARP money for all of this. You would be exempt for Davis-Bacon, you would be exempt for NEPA, but as soon as you bring in other funds, all of these things kind of snap back and are instantly applicable.
Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, I'm going to run through these next couple pretty quickly. I wanted to give you some other ideas within ARPA and within coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds that you can use to address climate and resilience. And one area is in this category of parks and outdoor space. There was a recently updated Q&A within from Treasury about the use of this, and saying that there are multiple ways to improve outdoor space that would qualify. And for one, I'll say within a qualified census tract, Treasury presumes the eligibility of a project when it's located in a QCT, meaning that these projects are less scrutinized because these tracts have already demonstrated need. And one example that they give is investments in parks, public plazas, and other public outdoor recreation spaces. Anything to promote healthier living environments and outdoor recreation, socialization to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. You can also use it within small businesses. Again, this isn't really climate related, but outdoor patios or facade improvements and government operations. It recognizes that there was a significant increase in the use of parks during the pandemic that may have caused damage. And so this could constitute a negative economic impact of the pandemic. And we can go to the next slide. Again, anything that's done to address disparate impacts of COVID-19 could also have a climate resilience lens to it. So for example, the interim final rule identifies a broad range of services and programs that are considered to be in response to the public health emergency when they're provided in communities disproportionately impacted. And I'm going to give you one example. This came to NLC as a question, but I think it's a good way to think of this category. So if you're looking at affordable housing, you could make climate-related building improvements such as efficiency measures or HVAC systems to those affordable housing units as long as they remain affordable housing after that improvement. We can go to the next slide. And finally, EPA received $100 million for environmental justice work to address disproportionate environmental harm to minority and low-income populations, in addition to funding air quality monitoring grants under the Clean Air Act. They have already announced the grants and the use of 50 million of that fund, of those funds, and they'll put out a notice of funding opportunity for the remaining 50 million probably in the coming months. Next slide.
So we wanted to provide you with some quick and easy resources from Treasury. Their main website and hub for the state and local recovery fund is the first link. We've included links to all of these resources that are on the presentation. We highly recommend that you or a designated staff member read through the interim final rule, read through the final rule when we get it. Continue to check Treasury's FAQs. They are frequently updated. And then don't hesitate to email Treasury directly as well at that email address. So at NACO, and I'm sure NLC too, we want to demonstrate to Congress that cities and counties can effectively manage and implement the greatest historical investment ever in local government. We want you to avoid having the newspaper say that your city or county misuse these funds and provide reasons to Congress to potentially claw this money back. We, during the infrastructure negotiations, NLC, NACO, and other state and local organizations had to fight Congress from clawing back these recovery funds and the CRF money as well. So please utilize these resources at Treasury. They are there for you guys to have.
Okay, and NLC's COVID-19 recovery hub is there, nlc.org/recovery. We have our blogs, and I just linked two here, a local action tracker, so you can see examples of how other municipalities are using ARPA funds. A couple of fact sheets two are listed here. The first one is about the green schoolyards, as I mentioned, and the second two there are drinking water and clean water deep dives on using those within the state revolving fund eligibilities, and also our webinar recordings. Next slide.
Yeah, and then for NACO, we established the COVID-19 clearinghouse at the beginning of the pandemic. This is where all of our ARP resources are housed. You can submit a question to NACO staff, share your story on how you've responded to the pandemic, and then also share best practices. Our staff is constantly updating this hub, and I can't recommend it enough. I've attached a link to the GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, revenue loss calculator that I mentioned earlier, and our resources on how to use it. This is where you'll learn exactly how much revenue loss your city or county has experienced through the pandemic. There is an equation that Treasury uses, so it's not necessarily real world impacts. 4.1% is kind of sticking out in my mind, but definitely use that calculator and then read the blog and our resources on how to use that equation. And then I've also included the link to NACO's FAQs. This often proves the old adage that if you have a question, it's very likely that somebody else has the same question. In the off chance, again, that you do have a unique one or something that we've never heard or it's not on our website, please email us, and we are very happy to connect with Treasury and get an answer for your unique situation. All right, so I think that wraps up our presentation. And here's the contact information. And then happy to see if we can answer a few questions for you guys.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was a lot of great information that you have included in this. And I particularly appreciate the pre-scripted Q&A questions for some of the frequently asked questions that you received to make sure that you got that information out on the front end. So I'm just going to go down to read some of the questions that we have in the Q&A. And if it is a repeat for information that was previously shared, feel free to just say, we kind of touched on this earlier. I just saw a question pop up in the chat in regards to receiving the presentation. I believe the answer is yes. The slides will be distributed to everyone after the webinar. And so I will ask for Ms. Starr or Ms. Davis to do a time check for me if we are going over on our time when it comes to Q&A, because we have a lot of them in here, which is a good thing. And as we said earlier, if we do not get to your question during this session, we will certainly provide you an answer via email. All right, so let's just maximize our time. First question is, can we use the funds for sewer repairs and projects that are also water line replacements? And whoever wants to tackle that. Yes, we talked about that. Okay, do you know if local governments will be allowed to submit more than one grant application? And if yes, what more do you know? I think you kind of touched on it at the end about using dual pots of money, but just want to make sure.
Well, I'm not sure I understand the question in terms of grant application, but I will say the money comes to the local governments in 2 tranches. So you'll get half now and a half a year from now.
Okay, and for Christy, you asked that question. Can you circle back in a Q&A, provide clarity if that doesn't answer you? Require reporting, do we refer to the ARPA reporting and compliance guide, or will there be something else?
The Treasury guidance on how to report it is going to be the best resource for you.
Okay. In the projects, do we need to use prevailing wages?
If you only use ARP money, no. If you start to blend other federal funds into your project, then if it is applicable under that other federal money, then yes.
Okay. For revenue loss, are most agencies depositing this in their respective funds, like the general fund, special revenue fund, etc., or just all in the general revenue fund? I think that's a question that's kind of hard to answer. It's however the localities take their money in. And how you're going to be using it. I would imagine it should go to your general fund because that should be the hub of all your monies, unless it's strictly for capital projects, but this money can be used in different ways. So I think you should defer to your respective state for guidance in regards to that. But in most localities, it should be your general fund, unless I'm wrong, Carolyn or Adam. Okay. I think you kind of answered this, but and just to make sure that we didn't touch on it in depth, it says, can you please go into detail about stormwater management? I thought this was primarily to be addressed today. And so I think we gave some discussion points on that. But if you want to touch on any other reminders, you can certainly do so at this time, Carolyn, Adam.
I don't think I have anything in particular to add. I mean, I think the Clean Water SRF guidance document, eligibility project document, is going to be the greatest resource here. It will go into depth about the types of projects that fit with that stormwater connection.
Okay. I do see something in the chat. I'll get back to that. I think that was a response to this. if we have already received funds and never gone to IDMe, what does that mean? We still need to go to do so? Yes or no, I guess, is the question.
I feel like if your city, town, village, county has already received funds, somebody has already done ID.me if it's not you.
Okay.
If that's not the case, then please let us know and either reach out to Carolyn or myself if you are a city or a county, and we can try to figure it out.
Okay. My town is seeking a capital grant to replace our public works building that houses all of the equipment that we use to run the town. If we are successful in getting a grant, are we allowed to use some of our ARP money to supplement the cost of this?
I would say probably yes, Adam, right?
Sorry, I'm just trying to see if they're building a new building or if they're just expanding. One of the things that we are cautious about is, again, trying to justify it back and kind of connect it to COVID. So if the equipment in town is helping COVID, then I think you have an easier time defending that.
Okay.
It was a for a water utility. Was that what the question was?
As it was public works, I think instead of replacing the public works building that houses all their equipment. That's all the information that's there. I think they might need to probably talk to you more offline regarding that. Yes, it's just replace our public works building. We're going to keep trying to go down. Should any use a Treasury portal as well as reporting?
I believe so, but I'm not entirely sure how that works for the communities that get the money from their state. So I'll have to do some research on that one and get back to that person.
Okay. So there was a question about how do you get questions into the Q&A. I saw the response. It should be at the bottom of your screen that you can be able to enter Q&A questions. Unfortunately, we only had limited time for this. I will ask staff, I will break away to send them a message to see if people have a little bit more time after our next session to be able to still do some Q&A because we do have a lot of questions in here, and if we can maximize on trying to provide clarity, that would be helpful, I think, to all the people that joined us. So I'm going to take my camera off so I can message to see if we have a little bit of wiggle room to adjust to get back to some of these questions while we have the experts on the line. But while I do that, I do want to pivot to our next speaker. We have some case studies that we have scheduled to have discussed, and it's examples for infrastructure funding. We have Beth, John, and Dawn here to briefly discuss information regarding case studies and examples that represent different types of localities. We have Beth Groff, planner, Charles County, Maryland, John Marley, environmental protection specialist for DC, Department of Energy and Environment, and also Don Phillips at large, vice chair of Delaware delegation for LGAC. They should be on the screen, and I think the presentation has been loaded up. So we're going to be able to pass it over to them to take it on. And for all of our attendees that have questions, be patient. We're going to figure out how we can address trying to answer some more of those for you. So we'll give an update shortly in the chat in regards to how we're going to address that. I pass the mic over to our next guest of panelists.
Thank you, Jasmine. That would be me. Good morning, everyone. My name is Beth Groff. I'm a senior planner with Charles County Government. We're located just about 30 miles south of the District of Columbia, for those on the line that aren't familiar with Maryland or Charles County. We're not considered Eastern Shore, we're considered Southern Maryland. Okay, next slide. So Charles County has chosen to use our ARPA funds for what we're calling the Community Stormwater Drainage Improvement Program. And the problem that we have identified, there's approximately 100 neighborhoods with private stormwater management systems that are exhibiting issues or problems. And we know this because we've received consistently a series of complaints of flooding and other issues, drainage issues. I know many people in the Mid-Atlantic region are familiar with all the deluge of rain that we received, especially in 2018 and continuing to 2019. And this is really when our flooding complaints kind of picked up. Many of these systems predate stormwater management ordinances, and they do not have any easements or maintenance agreements in place. If there was a homeowners association that existed at the time of the neighborhood construction, many of them don't exist today, or they just don't have the resources or the organization available to collect the resources to fund these kinds of issues or to fix these issues. And then, of course, impacts of climate change, as we've been discussing in this extreme weather and sea level rise, all of these not new, but what we're more recently seeing is compounding these problems. So it's making them worse. And failing systems will eventually become emergency situations, impacting both public safety and county-owned infrastructure, as well as Chesapeake Bay water quality. Next slide. So the solution that Charles County is attempting to do is that we will be offering to take over responsibility for the repair and maintenance of these systems in perpetuity. And this will take place over time, obviously. It's not going to happen all at once, and in a priority order based on the following criteria. The urgency of the need. These subdivisions are all in varying stages of disrepair. Equity, we will be using demographic data to ensure fairness, and also involving the county's chief equity officer in the prioritization process. Availability of funding. If a neighborhood can contribute funds, if they did actually collect from within their community and they're able to provide that, or there's other factors that arise that would reduce the overall financial burden on taxpayers, it could receive a higher priority for completion. And dual benefits. In some cases where more than one benefit can be attained, a neighborhood could receive a higher priority. And that would be an example would be emergency services, access concerns are addressed, in addition to also complying with the county's MS4 permit. And that permit requires the county to restore poor quality streams and also meet water quality protection goals. Property owners will be required to donate the necessary easements to the county for repair and maintenance. And we will be hiring a consultant to refine this criteria and also conduct a very thorough evaluation of all these neighborhoods and their systems to determine their condition and prior to the prioritization. Next slide, please. So there are a number of benefits to the county taking over these systems. And the most obvious are that, we'll be fixing the problems over time, which will alleviate the flooding concerns and improve water quality. And then natural solutions are certainly preferred to maximize multiple benefits. The green infrastructure that was mentioned, anytime we can attain stormwater or storm surge buffering or pollution abatement, carbon sequestration attainment, water reuse, these are all examples of multiple benefits that we'll be aiming to get out of these projects. And the cost will be borne by Charles County government from a variety of sources. And obviously, to deal with the problem now is more cost effective than trying to wait till when it becomes an emergency. And the Resilience Authority of Charles County will be the contracting authority for this project. And I really wish I had more time to talk about this. This is really a hot item right now, and I've done several presentations in other forums on this entity. But a bill was passed through the 2020 Maryland legislative session to allow local jurisdictions to establish these resilience authorities. And Charles County was the first in the state to establish one. And our resilience authority is a nonprofit government instrumentality, which provides more flexibility and funding options. Next slide. So obviously, we don't know the total cost of this project at this time. It will be very large, undoubtedly, but we are going to be using approximately 35% of our ARPA funds, and this equates to about 11.2 million. So we are going to initially start with this amount of funding, and then obviously we will have to continue the project after the ARP funds run out. And other funds that we will be used for rural broadband initiative. The county has already started a fairly large scale broadband initiative, and we want to continue this effort. We also are looking to do a reclaimed water filtration for our natural gas, CPV and Panda power plants, and then public safety projects, including purchasing a new ambulance, and also supporting our local businesses and nonprofits with grants and outreach and technical support. So that concludes my presentation, and I'll be available for questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Should I just jump right in, Jasmine?
Absolutely, thank you.
Great, thanks. Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is John Malari. I am coming to you today from the Washington, D.C. Department of Energy and Environment, essentially the environmental agency here in the District of Columbia. And I'm going to share a little bit about two programs that we are working to implement with some of our ARPA funding here in D.C. related to our water related efforts that we're working towards to meet some goals under the Chesapeake Bay agreements. The first I'm going to be talking about today is our Green Infrastructure Maintenance Program. A little bit of background first, DC being a highly urbanized area, we rely very heavily on green infrastructure practices to help meet our water quality goals. These best management practices, or BMPs as they're referred to, include things like street side rain gardens, permeable parking lots, rain harvesting operations. And these practices, along with others, help to collect and filter stormwater runoff, which is the largest source of water pollution in the District of Columbia that impacts our tributaries, our streams, our rivers, and ultimately the Chesapeake Bay. And while a large number of these practices are on private property, many of them also fall on district-owned land. So that's our schools, our roadways, our parks, our sidewalks. And these BMPs are unique, right? They're very visual. The public interacts with them very frequently. And we here in DC believe this really offers us a great opportunity to help support our water quality goals through the maintenance of these BMPs, while also working to educate residents and visitors on their importance. So the main goal of this program is to train district residents and to maintain some of these green stormwater infrastructure practices. This was identified as a major need in the district's Phase 3 watershed implementation plan. And for those of you who are outside of the Chesapeake Bay watershed, the watershed implementation plans essentially show how Bay jurisdictions are going to meet pollution reduction targets to support a healthy Chesapeake Bay. The program is also going to create green jobs, and will have a specific focus on creating opportunities for under and unemployed district residents, which we're very excited about. And there's going to be some water quality benefits, obviously, right? Functioning BMPs are critical to provide the water quality benefits they are designed for. And what's sort of important to understand about this project is that it's a coordinated maintenance effort across all district-owned BMPs citywide. Historically, these public BMPs were managed in a few different ways. They could have been managed and maintained by the agency responsible for their installation or their location, or they could have been managed by the district's Department of General Services, who handles the general management of all district facilities. But what's important to know about these practices, in many cases, they require specialized maintenance and management techniques. I'm sure anybody who has gardened knows that you really need to know what you're doing when you're working to maintain that garden that you have. And then when you're comparing that to general landscaping maintenance, there's a little bit more of a skill and knowledge effort that we want to see for the folks who are going out and making sure this infrastructure is functioning. So by coordinating the maintenance of these projects, we're really hoping to centralize the sort of asset management component that's involved in all of this, and really work to ensure that all of these BMPs are being maintained properly. But then there's also the community benefit sides, right? Well-maintained BMPs are just better received in the communities where they are located, and they can provide several co-benefits. especially in an urbanized area. You know, we heard Diana Escher this morning speak about some of the benefits that green infrastructure practices can provide to the communities where they're located. This sort of collaborative maintenance effort that's now coming to DOEE is really going to allow us to showcase some of the benefits to the communities where these BMPs are going to be placed. We're going to have a coordinated signage campaign. So really, in our eyes, it's a win-win, right? We are not only going to be able to ensure that these BMPs are better functioning and being maintained as they should be, we're also going to be able to be supportive of the needs and wants of the communities where they're located to make sure they can be maintained and are looking good. You can see a little bit about the cost of this particular project there. We have about $8 million in FY22 and about $25 million over 5 years to implement this. That's about 10% of the agency funding so that DOE has received from our ARPA funding. When you're talking about DC citywide, I think the district got something like $1.5 billion in that first year. So that's about 0.5% essentially. So half a percent of the money that we're getting for ARPA 2 DC is going to this project, which we're pretty excited about. You can go to the next slide. Great. And the second program I'm going to talk about is on a little bit lower of a fiscal impact scale, but is one that's sort of very near and dear to our hearts here in DC. Kingman and Heritage Island. There are a series of islands in DC on the banks of the Anacostia River. They're the district's only critical wildlife area. They feature over 100 different species of plants and animals that visit their habitat on the islands. But there are also park amenities there. There are trails, there are picnic tables, you can boat, you can fish, and they're very frequently used by district residents. In fact, we saw a really big boom on participation and visitation of the islands during the COVID-19 pandemic as folks wanted to get out and sort of social distance in nature a little bit. The park currently does not have any full-time staff that are designed to support the visitor experience there. So basically the goal of this program is going to work to hire full-time and seasonal park rangers to support those amenities and the visitor experience for folks who are visiting the islands. And what's sort of great about this program that we're very excited about is there's also a really sort of heavy workforce development component that we're building into this as well. So the program is going to be supporting the hiring of vulnerable district residents into these ranger roles by basically requiring specific hiring criteria of the grantee who's going to undertake this program that basically requires that they hire residents from DC that face the highest barriers to gainful employment. So we're very much excited about that component. Basically, the project is going to make the islands more inclusive and create opportunities for district residents and communities experiencing health and economic disparities. You can see a little bit about the cost of this program. It's on a much lower fiscal impact level than the green infrastructure maintenance project I spoke about. We have about $232,000 in this upcoming fiscal year that's going to be implemented toward this, and about $780,000 over 5 years. That's less than 1% of the entire allocation that we're receiving here at DOEE, but is one that we're very excited about as well, because it helps us meet some of the public access and environmental education goals that we've agreed to work to promote under the Chesapeake Bay agreements. So that's a little bit about the two projects here in DC. Yeah, I'm happy to answer questions too once we're finished. Thanks, everyone.
Hi, I'm Don Phillips in Laurel, Delaware. Am I on?
Yes, we can see and hear you.
Okay. I'm Don Phillips from Laurel, Delaware. I represent Delaware on LGAC, the sponsor of today's Dog and Pony Show. My hometown, it has a few facts I'd like you to know. A population of about 4,200, 33% below the poverty line, 50% Black, 45% white, 5% other. About half of our housing is rental housing. Our budget's about 6.3 million a year, of which water and wastewater is about 2.3. We have a modern wastewater septic system, and it's very important to this discussion because we provide an outside septic receiving business. That is, we take in rural septic loads into our plant, and it provides almost 10% of our income, so it's very important. We do have sludge removal issues. And the other thing that's important is during the COVID, we had bad debts because of our population and the difficulties they had during COVID. We had bad debts of water and wastewater service charges and fees of almost 30% during the period. what we are going to do is use our $2.2 million apportionment, 1.2, 1.1 this year, 1.1 next year, to upgrade our lagoons, our drying beds, and septic receiving station associated with the wastewater treatment plant. A good portion of that is for a fee that we've needed to postpone, and that is sludge removal and processing. We're also using, that's about 92% used for that purpose. About 8% is going to replace unpaid water and sewer fees, which are now bad debts. I'd like to go directly to the benefits, which go back to the facts that I gave you at the bottom. Funds are being used for postponed upgrades to the wastewater system, supplements fees, that is income shortfalls. It preserves our outside septic receiving station operation, which is very important, obviously, to our community. It allows us to optimize the level of bug efficiency. It allows the town to maintain surplus capacity for future growth, and we have higher regulatory standards. I think this is one of the real benefits. Of the 4,000 people in town, we probably are surrounded by an additional 10 to 15,000 in rural situations with septics, and we do receive that septic refuse into our system, and I think we're processing it a lot better than rural systems that are anywhere from 20 to 30 to 40 years old in some situations. And of course, the important thing financially, it precludes tax and fee increases. Next slide, please. Community benefits. It obviously eases the cost side of Laurel's clean water commitment, which we made 20 years ago with this new plant. It holds down the tax and fee increases, like I mentioned. It spreads the cost burden of clean water. It provides higher enhanced wastewater standards and quality to our rural neighbors. By doing this process, we'll maintain excess capacity, which will allow us to continue our residential and commercial growth. And I keep coming back to this thing. I think we're helping our greater community, the 10,000 to 15,000 that live around us, with a much higher quality level of processing. The cost against 2.2 million over 2 years, 1.1 has been committed this year. The ARPA allocation, 100% is 92% again is going to the main project, and 8% to cure the bad debts. And the takeaway, we're mainly using this to postpone operating and capital spending on our wastewater facilities, and a much smaller extent help with the bad debts incurred during the COVID crisis. Just in talking to our sister cities in the area, all of which are our size or smaller, almost across the board, these funds that I can ascertain are being used for these wastewater improvements that have been postponed and delayed. And I don't see a lot of activity on brand new environmental projects at this time using these funds. So I'll stop there and wait for questions with the others.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We just covered all the information that was relayed to us. And so I'm going to go to the Q&A field just to make sure that we answer all the questions. So give me one moment to pull that up. We still have Q&A from the other presentation. We're still getting an answer on how we can address getting back to those questions. So I believe we start off with a question for Beth. What was the political process used to develop the broad and inexpensive expenditure plan that you explained in your presentation? The expenditure plan. It says broad and inexpensive.
Sure. So the commissioners, as you can imagine, especially in 2018, received quite a few of these complaints directly. And I think just because they're very involved with their constituents and they regularly hold town hall meetings, and this is always, these issues with flooding and drainage concerns have always kind of risen to the top of the concerns that are brought before them. It really wasn't a difficult process to get them on board with trying to fix the problems in the community.
Okay, I see another question is piggyback off of that. Do all public safety expenditures, police, fire, operating expenditures qualify similar to CARES Act use of funds?
Are you asking me that question?
Yeah, it was around the same time. I think that might be a question for our VML, I'm sorry, our NACO and NLC experts on here to answer, because I don't want to put you in a hot seat in regards to answering such a broad question.
Yeah.
So the question was, the question went away. I think it was, does the expenditures for operating, let me go back down to see if it's in this other side. It was a question regarding, is the funding for operating expenditures for fire and police, I think, used similar to that of the CARES Act funding? And it qualify the same way.
I don't know the answer to that question. And I'd have to go back and look more closely at the CARES Act language, but I would say they're probably going to be different, because ARPA with the state and local fiscal recovery fund was extremely unique. And that provided way more flexibility than any of the other previous coronavirus relief packages.
Okay.
Really quickly to add on that, I think if you do rehire law enforcement to pre-pandemic levels, that would be covered. But I think it's solely on the personnel HR side of things, rather than going and getting new police equipment kind of thing.
Okay. And the question, yeah, I did find the question that was asked is, do all public safety expenditures qualify similar to CARES Act? And you kind of answered that already. Next question was, well, we have 7 creeks that run through downtown and have long-term goals to create creekside trail network. Under the ARP bucket, would that expenditure be justified? It's not related to wastewater directly. I think these questions kind of still are not going to the project. So I'm going to hold that until our other Q&A. I'm looking at the rest of them and they still seem to be very overarching questions regarding the use of funds. So if anyone has any questions regarding the presentations that we heard today from our panelists, Beth, John, and Dawn, please put that in the Q&A so we can ask them specific questions regarding their presentations. For your other general questions, we'll wrap that into the Q&A session that we're going into, but I just want to make sure we capture questions related to their content. I'm going to give everyone a moment to be able to put that in there. Someone says I have a question for Beth in the Q&A. I thought I read that question. Let me just go back to make sure I didn't miss it. Okay, I believe we asked that question that was in there. It was a question about, was the political process used to develop, and Beth answered that already. So if there's another question that I missed, please let me know, and we'll be sure to get you that answer. Oh, she said, sorry, I missed it. So Beth, do you want to just go ahead and give answer that really quickly for what was the political process used to develop the broad and expensive expenditure plan that you explained?
Sure. So the commissioners really decided on the plan based on their experience with their constituents, and that the flooding issues in their neighborhoods really rose to the top of the list of complaints and concerns from the community. The commissioners hold regular town hall meetings, and they a lot of the constituents voice their opinions and issues to them directly. So in addition to us receiving, as staff receiving calls through our inspections portal, the commissioners also received lots of calls. And so they were very well aware of all the problems that the community was experiencing with flooding and drainage concerns. So that really was really what precipitated them being able to push the stormwater ARPA funds for that particular purpose.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So
Sure.
we are wrapping up our plan presentation for today. I definitely want to thank all of our special guests and speakers that participated, and we're still trying to get clarity on the other Q&A that we have in here to be able to just even go back and answer some of those questions. And so I just want to put on the slide to thank all of our co-sponsors and everyone that attended. The recording will be shared, and the information that we have in terms of the presentation will be sent out to everyone. I saw a couple of questions in the chat box. We will be providing that to you. And we want to wish everyone the best of luck while they are addressing their infrastructure needs and making that critical investment. Before everyone drops off, I do want to ask if Carolyn and I think Adam had a few moments to see if we could answer a little bit more of these questions. And if not, that's fine. We'll definitely send it out to everyone. I definitely want to thank all of our presenters that we have here today, and thanking for all the guests that joined. So Carolyn and Beth, do you have a couple more minutes?
Sure, I could stay on for maybe 5 more minutes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we'll try see if we can get some more of these things answered. Thank you so much.
And we were typing in the chat as we were going through the other presentations. So hopefully we answered a number of them that way.
Okay. Page 6 of the Treasury portal says recipient funding has to be reported on October 31st. Is that accurate, that you know of, that they're supposed to be reporting in October?
Yes, I believe that's the date. And I did get an answer to that question on the NEUs, so which I answered in the chat, but I'll say now for those still on the line. For those smaller cities and towns that get the money from the state, you will use the Treasury portal for reporting, but the guidance from Treasury is not out on that yet. And it's not clear if the reporting will be the same as for the larger metros or counties. So the answer is stay tuned.
Okay. The city has a project for a cleanup of a landfill. The project is partially funded by the Department of Ecology. Reimbursement from Ecology has fallen behind, causing negative ending fund balances. Can ARPA funds be used for the unreimbursed project expenditures that will not be reimbursed by DOE this year? Ugh. That seems very specific.
I guess I would be hesitant because it sounds like the work has already happened. And so I would guess no, but what do you think, Adam?
I would echo that. I think Treasury and Congress really wanted these funds to be forward thinking. So based on how the question is phrased, it does sound like the project is done. So that's why I would be hesitant to also say you could use it. So yeah, I think that would be it. And then again, trying to justify and defend yourself to Treasury should they ever come and ask, I think is a good line of thinking.
Okay. We have 7 creeks that run through downtown and a long-term goal to create a creekside trail under the ARP bucket. Would that expenditure be justified since it's not directly wastewater tied?
Well, it sounds like it could be stormwater related. And with the creeks, you know, there's probably some kind of project related there, depending on what the work is related to the creek. So I would say a maybe. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to post in the full chat here for everybody those links to the 2 eligibility guides. They're in the slide, but I'm going to post them now so you all can start looking at them. And again, I think a word search is the best way that I have been doing this to kind of find what does this document say about X.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, some of the remaining questions are specific to projects, like can they use it for a trash cleanup? Can they use it for a pump station upgrade, for monies that have already been invoiced and paid? Can it be used to replace the building? And so I would say that we'll ask these questions to them to see if we can give you some guidance, but please copy and paste the link that was just put inside the chat to give you some immediate references. But we have to close the webinar. I'm so sorry that we weren't able to get to everyone's questions. I definitely want to thank Adam and Carolyn for staying on a couple more minutes, see if we can address some of these other remaining inquiries, but a lot of them are very specific, which lets us know that you're really interested in getting the work done and how you can use the money. So we will follow up with you. I hope everyone remains safe and engaged in this process, and we will be following up. So thank you again, everyone, for your time. Thank you again, Carolyn, Adam, and all of our special guests and our LGAC staff. You guys enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.